So thank you everyone for coming this morning. If you are here in Australia or if you are in North America right now, good evening. We're really excited today to put together kind of a presentation to discuss the pathway to residency in North America. And we're really excited because we have Dr. Damien Smith, who is actually an Australian medical graduate now practicing, and he's a chief resident in the United States in internal medicine. And we actually, he's going to discuss a little bit of his journey towards the end of this presentation as well. So we're really excited about that. So just to begin with an overview, so this is kind of what we'll be going through today, and it's going to be a very informal presentation. We'll have opportunities for questions throughout as well. So yeah, we're going to talk about CAAMSA for those of you who haven't heard of us yet. A little bit about being an IMG, so an international medical graduate, and then we'll discuss the match process in both Canada and the US. There are some similarities, but also differences with respect to exams and requirements and so forth. And then, of course, as mentioned, we have Dr. Damien Smith, who will provide some insight into his personal journey. And then we're finally going to close with some UQ specific statistics, resources, and closing remarks. And I'll just add that for all of you who have attended today, we are randomly selecting one winner for a 6-month AMBOSS subscription. We're going to do that at the end. Okay, so about CAAMSA. So CAAMSA is the Canadian American Australian Medical Student Association, and I'm one of the co-founders. I'm also a first-year medical student here at UQ. And coming from Canada, I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I thought to myself when I got to Australia that having kind of this group or organization who could allow medical students to really expand their knowledge, network, and interest into different medical specializations, advocacy, and research would be really beneficial. And so myself and Angela Kwan kind of decided to start this to help and support medical students across the world in their interests, whether it be to return, say, to North America or continue practicing in Australia if that's their interests. And as mentioned, our vision is really to invite alumni, residents, esteemed professors, experts, and speakers from diverse disciplines to show an interdependence of clinical sciences, basic sciences, public health, to really address the unique needs of our evolving patient population. And as mentioned, from across the world, we'll be hosting specialty series, providing important resources for matching and mentorship opportunities at our alumni and faculty lounge to help medical students prosper as our world's future leaders. And just a brief overview of kind of the events we've run thus far. So we have our specialty series, which many of you may have attended. We've highlighted the medical specialties of psychiatry and cardiology. And so our goal in that, as kind of seen in the previous slide with our vision, is to allow medical students, whether they're in year 1 or 2, or even in year 3 and 4, to really learn about the medical specialty, learn about the innovation, how the field's changing. We've invited 3 speakers each from the different countries. So for instance, we had a cardiologist from Canada, we had a cardiologist from the United States, and a cardiologist from Australia, and they each spoke about their unique experiences in each of the respective healthcare systems, and also discussed a little bit of the requirements about what is required in terms of training, in terms of fellowships, in terms of the process that they had to take. And so that's our goal of the specialty series. Today, we're really excited because we're launching this Matching Matters series with UQMS, which is UQ's Medical Student Society. And our goal here is to, again, help medical students achieve their goals, whether it be to return potentially back to North America, as of course that's an option, and understanding that, of course, there are some challenges or extra barriers that as international medical graduates we may face when returning home. And so we want to kind of streamline this process and put together kind of resources, timelines, and things of that nature to help and support you if that's an interest of yours, or if that's a goal for you to return potentially back to Canada or North America. And then briefly, we have On our website, we have a resource page with resources concerning the different exams. So we'll get into that, but the MCCQE in Canada or the USMLE in the US. Also some other resources with some essential web pages, information, timelines, and things like that. So just briefly, an IMG, if you're not familiar already, stands for International Medical Graduate. So essentially, if you are completing your medical degree in a country that is not where you're permanently residing or is not your home country, then you are termed an international medical graduate. So you're essentially completing a medical degree in a country that's not the target country that you want to practice in. That would be an international medical graduate. And it's important to mention that as an international medical graduate, how CAAMSA and the NRMP look at you is a little bit differently. So you're kind of clustered into your own cohort. So they have, of course, for instance, in the US, you're going to have US residents, you're going to have non-US IMGs, and you're going to have US IMGs, similar to, that would be an example of a US IMG would be our Ochsner students, because they're a US resident, but of course they're completing their medical education in Australia. So that's just a little overview, and it's important to mention that because, of course, if you look down below here, this is a little snapshot from the 2022 NRMP match, and there are certain specialties, certain states, for instance, that are essentially, there's more available positions, or there's a higher success match rate in certain specialties in certain states. So that's important to think about when you're applying as an IMG. And just briefly to compare the two systems, so Australia really has a different system than both the Canadian and the US system. I won't go too much about the Australian system because, of course, our focus today is more so on the North America side of things. But essentially, of course, in North America, after you complete a 4-year MD, you apply to residency, which is typically a 4-year program, and you do that directly out of your MD. Whereas in Australia, you actually will complete a year or two of internship and become a registrar before kind of choosing your specialty. So it's important to think about that in terms of the timeline. Registrar in Australia is similar to residency here, and then a consultant in Australia is similar to an attending in the Canadian system. And just to reiterate here, this is an example of the US kind of pathway timeline. So of course, medical school, M1 and M2, so that would be your first 2 years. Then you'd write your USMLE step 1, which is a heavy clinical science exam, essentially testing what you see there, anatomy, physiology, microbiology, everything essentially learned in your phase 1 of your medical program. And then you complete your years 3 and 4, which are, of course, your clerkship rotations. Then you write your step 2, which is, again, more so based on that practical clinical skills. And then you, of course, then apply for that 4-year residency directly from out of that MD. In terms of just kind of a spotlight and overview, we've touched upon a little bit of this, but in Canada, the kind of association that is responsible for organizing the whole match process and administering the whole match process is CAAMSA. It's called CAAMSA. And essentially, any medical student graduate who has attained their MD by July 1st of each year is eligible to participate in the CAAMSA match, with a requirement being that you're a Canadian citizen or you hold a permanent resident card. Now, if you don't, there are hospitals and programs that will sponsor a visa, but it is a little bit more difficult, and that's an extra hurdle if you're not a Canadian citizen. So, of course, being a Canadian citizen, you don't have to worry about those requirements. And then in terms of exams, you have the NAC-OSCE, which will be completed before, typically in year 4, and then MCQ EE step 1, which is also completed typically in around the year 4, just before you're applying, or in and around the time that you're applying to the CAAMSA match. Applications typically for CAAMSA open up in October of each year, closing at the end of January, and fees approximate of around $400 Canadian. Now for the United States, their match process is through the NRMP. Again, a medical student or graduate who has obtained their MD by July 1st. Specifically with the United States, of course, if you're not a citizen, each residency program decides if they consider IMGs and which visa types they support. So again, just reiterating when we were talking a little bit about being an IMG in both Canada and the US, it's important to consider the specialty you're interested in, potentially the state and the hospital you get matched to, and whether they are able to sponsor a visa for you. So those are just all things to keep in mind. And again, on our CAAMSA website, you can find resources to all of those things. In terms of the exams, step 1 and step 2. So step 1, we briefly went over, is that heavy clinical science exam, typically written at the end of year 2 after phase 1 of your MD. And then the USMLE step 2 is your clinical skills and practice, and that's typically completed towards the end of year 4 before you're, of course, applying to residency programs. Those applications open in September of each year and typically close at the end of January, and those fees approximate at about 100 US. I have Australia there. I know that's not really the highlight of today's presentation, but it's there for you to go over if you want. In terms of CAAMSA, so we're going to get a little bit more into detail here. You can see those 2 graphs on the right. So those are snapshots from the 2022 match. And you can see how they're grouped. So Canadian medical graduate, US medical graduate, and an IMG. And you can see here for yourself the statistics. So in this past year, for current year graduates, there is an 82.9% match rate for CAAMSA in the first iteration, and a 66.7% match rate in the second iteration. And then specifically, you can see how they break this into different regions. So as someone graduating from an Australian medical school, we are classified under Oceania and Pacific Islands. So last year, there was actually the highest match rate in the past 5 years of 71% if you graduated as an IMG from an Oceania or Pacific Island school, and 31 total people matched there. Some general information is here for you as well, and the eligibility that we mentioned as well. These things are more kind of descriptive details that you'd get into as you're kind of applying and in the process of applying through the CAAMSA portal. So I won't touch too much upon that. It's more just kind of logistical stuff. And then here's the match. So again, on the left there is 2 tables kind of outlining a snapshot from the 2022 results. So you can see here both US citizen students of international medical students, so a US IMG and a non-US IMG, and you can see the total that matched and unmatched in PGY1. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it's also important to consider the specialty and how many kind of positions are available for that IMG cohort. So you can see on the top column here, the NRMP, the match, kind of groups each cohort into their own. So if you're an MD senior, an MD grad, a DO senior, DO grad, others, and then of course, what we're interested in today, US IMG and non-US IMG. And you can see in family medicine, for instance, or internal medicine, there's quite a few that matched this past year. And so it's important to think about it. For instance, family med, preventative med, there wasn't anyone that graduated. So if that's something you're interested in, then it might be a little bit more difficult. But there are, of course, some of the specialties that are very desirable and that have a lot of positions for an IMG. And then specifically, again, these are kind of more general information and details, logistical details that come closer to the time of application. But to participate in the main residency match, you will need something and need to apply through something called the ERAS portal, which is the application service used when applying to US residency programs. And specifically, the ECFMG is used by IMGs to participate in the match. So that's kind of more logistical details that are that concern you closer to the time of application that we don't need to discuss too much today. And then again, timelines, we discussed how kind of in that September, October timeline of each year is when the portal would open. and you'd start filling in your application, of course, your CV, any research, all of that good stuff. And then these are all snapshots from our website. So kind of a more comprehensive outline of a lot of this would be on our website for you to refer to at a later time. But you know, you can kind of go through the timelines there for yourself. And then we also have exam resources, as I've mentioned. So the MCCQE is the big one for Canada, as mentioned, at the end of year 4, and the USMLE Step 1 and 2 at years 2 and 4, respectively. There's kind of different resources that we house on our website for you to help you prepare with that. So now we're going to transition over to Dr. Damien Smith. I'll just quickly introduce everyone to him today. So Dr. Damien Smith grew up in Sydney. He completed his undergraduate degree in psychology at the University of Sydney in 2005, and then completed a PhD in psycholinguistics at the University of Western Sydney in 2010. He returned to the University of Sydney to study medicine, graduating in 2014, before working for 2 years as a junior medical officer at Westmead Hospital. He completed SRMO years in general surgery at Royal North Shore Hospital in intensive care at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital before migrating to the United States for family reasons. He recently finished his residency in internal medicine at Georgetown University MedStar Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C., and is returning for a year as chief resident. His interests outside of medicine include heavy metal and cats. So without further ado, we will have Dr. Damien Smith take over this part of the presentation. So thank you again, Dr. Damien Smith, for taking the time out of your day for this.
Yeah, awesome. Jacob, can people hear me? Should be right. Yep, good. Okay, so just want to start off by saying thank you for having me along to this event. It's a real honor. I think that associations so thank you to Jacob and to Angela, but associations like CAAMSA are really, really important. So I think it's a really good thing that you've arranged this here. There's always a lot of, so at Sydney University, when I was at medical school, there was a good chunk of Canadian and US students, and they sort of had their own sort of similar sort of society, I think. But there's always a lot of people with kind of a general sense of how they're going to get back home. Or there are Australian students with like a plan, you know, to sort of maybe work in the United States or in Canada. And I think really kind of varying ideas on what they should be doing, or what's important, what's not important, what's realistic. And there's often a lot of anxiety about that. And I think that having kind of a group of people around you to kind of normalize that, to give advice to each other, to support each other is just, it's really, really important. So I'm just, you know, want to commend you and to keep up the good work. So I just want to start off by kind of giving my own experiences. So my path is very odd. And I think if you were listening to Jacob kind of giving the bio, like the path I've chosen, or not really chosen, but sort of taken to get where I am now is not what I would have done on purpose, I guess. And I think that that's something that a lot of you should be able to kind of take some heart in. So what I would say is, let me just sort of see what I was going to say, actually. I think the main thing is that if you feel really behind or disorganized, I'm doing okay, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I'm pretty sure I did everything wrong. And so whether you're someone who's like coming to the end of medical school, or someone who's just in their first year and you're worried frantically, like, what have I done? What do I do next? Am I already behind? It's very probably actually going to be fine. You know, a lot of the things that people will tell you to panic about are kind of incorrect. So just for perspective, so I didn't really have a plan to work in the United States when I was in medical school. It was sort of vaguely on my mind because my partner was an American citizen, but her career was in Australia and she liked living in Australia. So we were kind of happy like that. And I'd sort of looked into it very, very briefly. And my understanding was, well, there are some exams you've got to take, and you can just apply for a job, I guess. And I just kind of figured that, you'd be able to work it out. which is obviously it's a bit more complicated than that. But I think, you know, if someone were to give you advice on how to match into your dream program in the United States, they'd say, okay, well, number one, get a good undergraduate degree from a good college, and then go to a, you know, well-known American medical school and do really well there. Get some research done, get some, you know, get brilliant grades and get some great letters of recommendation, and then you'll be able to match into the program of your choice. Oh, and also get excellent step scores, and then, you know, like, you've got your perfect CV and you can match anywhere you want and you'll be fine, you know. And so I didn't do any of those things. So I, you know, went to Australian medical school and I didn't do very well. I got good clinical assessments, but, you know, like, my exam scores were pretty average. I didn't really get any research done. I was really busy trying to pay rent the whole time. And my step 1 score was also pretty average. And I did take step 3 beforehand, which is a good thing. And if you can do that, I would recommend it. It does actually look very nice in your application. And to be honest, your education in Australia will prepare you best for step 3 and far less for step 1. This is a bit of a digression, but I'm really happy that step 1 is now pass fail, because it's just, it had become increasingly irrelevant to any medical practice. That, you know, like, step 2 is reasonably relevant to what you know from medical school, but step 3 actually is where what you will learn in Australian medical school and from practicing as you know, from your experience as a medical student in Australia, will actually line up with the actual practice of medicine. So I would recommend doing that before you start. But anyway, so I moved to America entirely because of my partner's career, and I was hopeless at networking, but I kind of, you know, sort of met some people and got some kind of local contacts, and they were all kind of willing to vouch for me and talk to some people and make some stuff happen. But by the time they actually would have done that, applications were already in. So I don't think I got any sort of points for having anyone nearby kind of helping me out with stuff. And I also was very limited in where I was choosing to interview. So the other thing that, you know, people will tell you to do, and I strongly recommend this if you can, is apply everywhere. Like, really apply, like, in a sense, it'll be easy for you because a lot of you will be less constrained by geography, but I was basically restricting myself to within a reasonable radius of Washington, DC, so I could, you know, sort of not be too far away. And so basically, I'd ruled out most places in the country. But so in the end, I applied, I got 9 interviews, which is enough, really. There's no magic number. In reality, you really only need 1. But, you know, in practice, like, 20 is a good number. I got 9. And let's see, the first place I interviewed, it wasn't even like I got a dry run. I had to go straight to the one place I really, really wanted to match at, which was the one place in DC. And so I, you know, get there and I meet people and I go for my first one-on-one interview, and the person I'm interviewing says to me straight away, so I didn't know I was interviewing anyone today. And started kind of leafing through my CV, and I'm like, well, this is already a disaster. But you know, I got along well enough, and I then went to interview with someone else who said, I just got a text message saying, you know, that he really liked you. And I'm like, oh, good. And we got talking, and basically made a really good impression, and they've made a really good impression on me. And that was, you know, ultimately where I matched. So it sort of landed on my feet. But the other places I interviewed at, it's just a really bizarre set of experiences, I guess. You know, generally pretty normal. So most places, you know, you'll as you go to interview, you'll get a program description from a program director. Like, they'll talk about why it's great and why you should come to their program. You'll interview personally with 1 or 2 faculty members. They'll do a bit of like a structured didactic session, so you'll be present at that and see what the culture's like. They'll give you a sandwich. You'll meet the facility. You'll meet the residents, tour facilities, and ask questions, and then go home. And I think I learned a lot about places while I was there. Definitely, I think the reason why it can be difficult to match as an Australian medical graduate in the United States, and I don't know about Canada nearly as much, But I do have some insight on matching in the United States. I think the biggest thing is people really don't know what to make of your application. So a lot of institutions are like, well, I've never heard of the University of Queensland. They'll call it Queensland. And they'll say, well, I've never, I can look up online and see that this is a, decently ranked medical school, but I don't know anyone else who went there. I don't know any of the faculty there. I don't know what their training is like, like, would they learn medicine or what do they learn? And then they don't understand how to interpret your grades because, like the way that we grade things is different in Australia. And they won't know any of your letter writers. And if you've got any clinical experience in Australia, there'll be a lot of words that they literally just don't understand. So there's a lot of uncertainty that they have when they're looking at these applications. And so in a sense, you can also so that's kind of the major hurdle for a lot of programs. And for that reason, a lot of programs simply just won't consider international applicants. They'll say, well, I don't know we don't know how to assess them. We don't know if they're good or not. We tried it once and we got burnt. And then of course the other thing is, they'll have to sponsor visas, and that can cause all kinds of headache and requires an extra layer of administration. So they can be very dubious about getting involved with international graduates. Like they're like, well, we took one and then he actually was delayed by a month, and so the whole schedule was off and it was just terrible. And so that's kind of what you're up against in that way. I just kind of want to get that out of the way because there's other advantages that you actually have. So number one, if you're coming from Australia to the United States, everyone really wants to know about you. Like, it's so exciting. Like, so every single place I went, everyone was like, so why are you here all the way from Australia? That's so exciting. Tell us about that. And when it comes to your application and when it comes to your interview, you can actually just like go with that and talk about how wonderful it is to study medicine in Australia. They're like, yeah, well, there was if you're in Queensland, you're like, yeah, there's sunshine and the weather's wonderful, the people are great, the food's fantastic, and talk about the high quality medicine you do in Brisbane, and then also talk about the hair raising stuff you have to do in the middle of nowhere if you get to do that, because it's fascinating and it makes you a better person and a broader person, and you can use that and people really want to hear about it. And so that was something which I didn't expect at all, but people were really excited to know, like, what's Australia like? Does everyone is it like on TV or is it different? The other thing is that you have a different perspective having studied in multiple countries. So most of you, if you've lived in one country and now you've moved to another, even though there's a lot of cultural crossover between the United States and Australia, there are differences. And again, it makes you a broader person. And so you can, use that basically just it's an automatic level up in maturity is one thing I've noticed in other people. And that's something you can also use in your interviews and in your conversations. I think I can give a lot of advice on what you should be doing in interviews and that sort of stuff, but I think I just want to kind of, I mean, a lot of it's pretty sensible, like be polite to every single person you meet. Remember that the program director at every place you go to is kind of like a god emperor, so treat them with a significant amount of respect, and obviously prepare beforehand. So make sure that you have answers to all the questions that people are likely to ask you, and make sure that you've just make sure you've actually thought through things like, why would you apply to this program? And the truth is, obviously you're going to apply to a lot of programs because they're hiring, but obviously you don't say that in an interview, and you should talk about why you particularly like this part of this city, or what is it about this area of the country, or this part of like you saw on their website, they had this particular program that sounded really good, and there's a reason you put them on your list, so make sure you talk about it. I think what I can speak of more generally is my experiences at my own program. So as Jacob was saying, so I ended up matching exactly where I wanted to, and I've been there for 3 years now, and I'm staying on for another year as chief resident. And basically because of that, exposed to like the recruitment process than a lot of people. And so what I can speak about is, I've spoken about like kind of the average program in whatever it is, and that's for internal medicine, but other people that process like on paper it's the same, but in terms of what the culture is like in interviews and that sort of thing, I really can't speak to that. So there are a smaller number of programs specific for international medical graduates. This could be you. So if you like if you are a good student and if you work hard on your rotations and you're professional on those things, there's no reason why you can't also be a good international medical graduate with a good looking CV. Our program director has the philosophy that like if someone takes the time to apply to the program, she'll read their application. We get applications from all over the world. So there's usually about 6,000 applications for 30 places as a PG1. And everyone gets to look in. The numbers there are for IMGs in general, but you have specific advantages. People will read your applications because you're from a Western country, which means essentially that there is a lot of your medical education that is commensurable. Like they know, okay, well, it will have been roughly similar to medical school in the United States. We can kind of start from that point of view. Essentially, our program made a decision. A lot of other programs I noticed had that I interviewed at had made a decision, which is there is basically an advantage in knowing how to assess international medical graduates because you can recruit excellent students and bring them to your program, and that's basically what they've done. So it means my colleagues are actually from all over the world. And Jacob, is it all right if can I share my screen briefly? I'll just see if I can bring this up, but I just want to show something which I think is kind of nice. Yeah, okay, so just close this survey. There you go. I've lost you. Here we go. All right, so it's kind of freaky. Let me just cross over to here. Sorry, it's being a bit slow. All right. I'm feeling like I suddenly aged about 30 years and I'm not able to use Zoom properly. 1 second. Here we go. All right, let's try this one. Oh, sorry, that's why. My computer won't let me do it because I had decided not to let Zoom share my screen. It's just trying to, but while it's doing that, sure. Okay.
Jacob, I just want to check.
Right.
Ian has host privileges, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's not the issue. It's actually it's my computer arguing that I would prefer not to share my screen with Zoom, which is still not letting me. That's all right. But I think the main so basically on the website for my residency program, you can actually see a map of all the places where people have all the hometowns from around the world. And there's a couple things about it, but one is that there's a solid, basically every continent is represented and a lot. And the other thing is I'm looking on it and I immediately recognize where everyone's from. I'm like, okay, there's my friend who's from Botswana. There's my friend from, my friends from Karachi, my friends from the Gulf, my friends from Jordan, my friends from Austria, my friends from Peru and so on. So it's basically there are programs that do make an effort to try and understand how to assess international medical graduates, and they tend to basically, yeah, here it is. they tend to end up recruiting really good ones. And so when you go through this process, there'll be a lot of places that you're looking for where you want to match in your residency. And one thing that you can do to really sort of maximize your chances of going to somewhere that you will like, where you'll be respected and sort of looked after, and where you'll actually get a chance to really thrive in a good medical culture, is if you go on the website of the programs you're looking at and just look at where their residents come from. So in fact, Jacob, if you can scroll down, so you can just see a bit further down, you start to see a list of all the, say, the PG3s. They haven't updated for this year yet, but basically this, as I'm looking at this here, if you see a whole lot of people who went to, say, Aga Khan University or Jordan University of Science and Technology or Aristotle University of Medicine at Thessaloniki or whatever, then you'll know that, okay, this is a program that takes international graduates seriously, that knows how to assess them. And also, if you see names like that, like the ones I mentioned, they also recruit really, really good graduates. So that's basically something that you can kind of take advantage of, because there'll be other places where you look it up and they say, we do not interview international graduates. Yeah, well, that's a total waste of my time. The other thing is that, well, there's you can have a lot of anxiety about these things. I think just when you reach that point, when you actually reach the point of having an interview, the thing to remember is this: for most programs, you've already crossed the line. Like, it's so time consuming and, you know, emotionally exhausting for everyone involved to interview people, and to, you know, put a good show on and basically, you know, convince people to come to the, you know, to, okay, you've come this far, we want you to choose our program. That no one interviews anyone to make up numbers. No one interviews anyone out of courtesy. No one interviews anyone they really don't think would be a great fit there. So if you make it to the interview stage, then it really is about making sure you make a good professional impression and having them impress you. And you don't have to worry nearly as much about aspects of your CV or whatever that you might think, you know, like you might think you're being disadvantaged because you're a UQ graduate or something like that. So basically, once, you know, it sounds like you guys have a good system already, but once you kind of over that line, then it really just comes down to what kind of match you are, sort of personality wise. The other things I would say is, and this is not just a plug for my program, although, I mean, if people are sort of reaching that point interested, then feel free to reach out. We can talk about, you know, sort of, you know, whether you'd be a good fit and what sort of thing you should look for in your application, that kind of thing. I think the other thing about it is programs that recruit IMGs are very accustomed to the hurdles that you face as an IMG. So for instance, every year we start basically with 50 or 60 new interns, so preliminaries and categoricals, but basically 30 categorical internal medicine residents. And of those, there's always about 5 or 6 that don't start on time, you know, because they're waiting for ECFMG to get their act together, or they're waiting for their visa to get approved, or they have some issue with transit, or something's come up. And our program is very accustomed to accommodating these people, and basically they start, you know, 1 or 2 months late if necessary, and then everyone completely forgets about it. Like, so they immediately get caught up and it is never an issue again. And so if you really do focus on looking at school programs that are used to recruiting people from other countries, they will embrace you with open arms, because they're happy to have people who are good doctors. And also they're used, all the things you would worry about, like coming together from an immigration sort of point of view or whatever, they can usually take care of. That's really, there's only other 1 or 2 points I wanted to say before I just open up for any questions. One general piece of advice is, as you move into this process, move quickly on it. So getting your exams, like sitting your exams and making sure you've had time to study for them, you know, it takes a sort of planning and time commitment. Getting all the stuff you need uploaded from from your medical school, that kind of stuff takes time and commitment. Researching programs, getting things together, it all just takes time and commitment. So don't leave any part of this to the last minute. Really work with CAAMSA and with any other sort of resources you have to get stuff rolling quickly. The other thing I would say is it is expensive. So I saw the only money amount I saw on the slides was $100 for like the NRMP registration. In practice, this is going to be a several $1,000 expense. So each step exam is it's still about $1,000 Australian dollars or something like that. I think step 1 and step 2 each. At least you don't have to do the clinical skills anymore. That requires a trip to the United States and doing a dance. So at least that's off the table too. If you do step 3, I think that's 2,000 or maybe one or 2,000. And then the actual application fees for exams. So you get your registration fee through ECFMG or ERAS or both. But then every program you choose to apply to costs money. So if you're like me, I applied to about 100 medicine programs, and that it's kind of got a rapidly escalating cost. So it begins as like a nominal amount for your first 10 programs, and then it escalates pretty quickly. So it costs, I think, about $2,000 just to apply to all those programs. And as an IMG, realistically, you may need to apply to that many. You know, again, you only need one interview if it's the right interview, but it would generally be encouraged. So again, for most of you, these will be expenses that you can meet. But again, that takes time, and if you're not working because you're a medical student, that'll take time and planning. So I think those are the main bits of advice I would give. But I think to summarize, I would say is it's possible to have a lot of anxiety and agita about there, but there are plenty of programs who would love to take a really solid graduate of an international medical school and have all the time and respect for you as a clinician if you've got it. And there's really a lot of people tell you exactly what you have to do. There's no correct path. It doesn't really, you know, a lot of those things only matter a small amount. And so, you know, like you should all kind of go in there with optimism and yeah, see how it goes. So yeah, so if, I'm happy to answer any questions or anything that people might have.
Great, yeah. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Smith. And we will have this now open to questions. So if anyone wants to use the chat to ask any questions for either Dr. Smith or for one of us, we'd be glad to take your questions at this point. I might just open up the conversation. I think I can speak to a lot of people with this question. I know you mentioned a little bit about how, as an Australian graduate, of course, US medical residency programs and the people viewing the applications are not really sure about it, or don't have, you know, professional relationships with the people writing these letters and so forth. And so how important do you think it is to actually gain US clinical experience prior to applying? So either through an elective rotation in your year 3 and 4, or just trying to complete some sort of observership? Is that a requirement for some programs?
Look, some programs it's an explicit requirement. I would strongly recommend it for 2-3 reasons. Number one, if you aren't sure which country you want to be working in, getting some experience in the US medical culture is really valuable because it's quite different. There's in the same way that the many cultures within the United States are different from Australian culture, medical culture is also quite different, and you may find that you don't actually really want to work there, or you may find that actually this is exactly the right place for me and I love it. So that's the first thing and first reason. The second reason is that if you get a chance to do an observership or an elective at a place where you'd actually really like to match, then A, that's a great place to see if you would like to match there, and also B, it's a great place. It's by far the best way to get known. If they already know who you are, then, and your CV doesn't have anything wrong with them, or if they like you, then they'll take you. You know, as long as you're across the line in terms of your qualifications, if you like it and they like it, then they know that you're someone they like as a much better quantity than someone that they're not sure about. The other reason is that, again, a lot of programs really, really value that experience. So I was doing some observerships in the United States, but while I was interviewing rather than pre-application. I just sort of been accepted to one. And for a lot of places, it was clear they're like, and I see you're doing some, okay, good. So you're getting some experience. Oh, great. So they were like very reassured that I was not, sort of coming in completely naive. The worst place that I interviewed, and it was incredibly depressing. It was the last place I interviewed, and it was a terrible city. And because this is all in person too, it was a terrible city. The food was terrible because I couldn't eat anything, and they were rude. And the residents that we met said, this place is no one's first choice. It's terrible. I'm like, okay, well, I really don't want to match here. But the person interviewing me said, well, I think you really should get some more US experience. I think that'll be really important for you. So even from that point of view, they seemed pretty like desperate to take anyone they could get, and were still like, yeah, more US experience. So I think anything you can do to get across that line, and sort of, I think that's, if you have that opportunity, absolutely embrace it. It's not utterly necessary, but it's a very, very sensible move.
Great. Yep. Thank you so much for that. I see we have a question in the chat from Joseph. He says, are you familiar with the process of working on Australia as a consultant after completing residency in the US, or maybe resources that could help? I guess that's just the way around.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question too, because you might want to train as, say, a cardiologist in the United States and then come back someday, or keep that option open. So one of my colleagues here, one of the specialists here was actually had looked into it, and I looked into it as well, just kind of in case. It depends on the specialty, but if you want to say, for instance, be like a cardiologist in Australia after training in America, it's very possible, because basically Australia will say, the Australian system will ask itself, is your training comparable enough? So have you actually had enough years learning medicine and learning, and in a training program that's comparable enough? And for most US programs, the training is comparable enough. So then what is required is you'll have to come and do a year of supervised practice. So basically you'll be a registrar in your specialty of choice for a year to gain full licensure, and also to then be admitted to the college and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit cumbersome, but it can be done. So yeah, that door is definitely open. And the other thing is that I remember looking into this for a friend, and who was looking about moving to Australia after completing medicine residency. And again, there are plenty of opportunities to be like, look, I just did 3 years of medicine. I don't want to do a specialty. I just want to go home and work on something. There are lots of jobs in Australia that are basically locum ER registrars or locum GP registrar kind of things, that specifically work to sponsor you as a year, basically to count as a year of supervised practice. And so then you can go forwards to work after that. So it's a little bit specialty dependent, but that pathway is definitely open.
Great, thank you for that. Another question in the chat here: comparing the clinical experience and training in the US versus Australia, what are the main differences that you've noticed?
So there's a lot of differences. In terms of the way medicine is practiced, it's famously more defensive in the United States. There is a deep tendency to investigate more, but there's also a tendency to investigate more. Like in Australia, I wish we would investigate more. And the reason for that is, I guess it's more to do with prior probabilities and resource management. So it's like, for instance, at a tertiary referral center in the United States, if I want an MRI of someone's brain, then I can just ask for that and it will get done, usually that day, depending on many things. And certainly if I want to get a CT of someone's chest, that's happening within an hour, and that's just something I, as a trainee, can just order, in the same way I could also order a complete blood count or something. But in Australia, for instance, as a junior medical officer, if you want a CT of someone's chest, you then have to basically call up radiology and plead with the radiology registrar to, justify why you're going to do this. And there's no question that you would want to actually, sort of like, it's kind of your own business. They're much more procedure oriented, and there's just a lot of things to do with documentation and to do with like there's a completeness and thoroughness which is at times exhausting, but also like this is just how it's done here. It's more serious, like there's again, but the culture in I mean certainly in the mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast is far more it's just different, as you're probably aware, like the level of what is acceptable in terms of politeness and respect and that sort of thing is just different. And so you'll feel that in your medicine residency. I think that's a couple of the differences. I think the biggest difference in training is there's two big differences in training, actually. Number one is the balance between service and responsibility. So in Australia, as a graduate, so when you're an intern, and if you stay in Australia to do your internship, then you'll basically be given not a huge, like a lot of reasonably straightforward responsibility. You do a lot of documenting and recharting medications, and you won't have to make many plans. And your medical education will actually be kind of very ad hoc, and you kind of osmose it instead, whereas medicine residency, so basically there's a focus on service rather than education, and people are brought along very slowly. In a US medical residency, for example, you're given a lot of responsibility very fast. So people who are very fresh out of med school are put in positions they would never be put in Australia, because like they've been practicing for 2 months now. And so that's, I think, a significant difference. And the other thing is that the culture of education is really intense. So the expectation in terms of, there's a huge amount of structured teaching that you're expected to be present at and participate in, and basically ways that you'll be assessed continuously. It's just extremely different. So just, I know I could talk about these kind of things for hours, but one thing is the program director, so to speak, of, the person in charge of junior medical officers at Westmead was someone who I met with twice in 2 years. He was really nice. He and I had basically no interaction, and that was kind of normal. The person, my program director here at Hospital Center, is someone who I know extremely well because I see her every single day, and she's extremely involved in everyone's education and everyone's progress, clinically and academically and professionally. And like it's just, you'll really be in a program where people are literally working very hard to make sure that you turn into a doctor that is excellent by the end of it. So I think that's great. I think it's excellent, and I think that I love it. Like in the same way I feel like I'm extremely supported here, which is something which was a bit more vague in Australia. So I think that's one big difference in how things are practiced.
Great.
I'm looking at the chat too. I can see someone asking, did I complete a 4-year? So the answer regarding basically I wasn't able to count anything I'd done in Australia. So I've just completed, the medicine is 3 years. I'm doing a 4th year as a chief resident, which is basically a leadership, teaching and administrative position. So there's not much clinical stuff, and there's a whole lot of, it's just, you're sort of a faculty member of sorts. But yeah, there was no scope to recognize what I'd done before, so I wasn't able to shorten anything. They have previously been able to shorten training duration for people, but they were like people who, for instance, there's a guy who was an interventional cardiologist in Israel who is now, was able to, come over and had to start again as an intern. But he was able to take a year off his training and then, immediately progressed very directly through his cardiology training, and is now one of the most brilliant interventional cardiologists anyone's ever met. So basically, you won't get any credit for anything you do in Australia, but it will make you a better doctor, and it will be valuable on your CV if you're applying. So that's, I think, the answer to that question. I see a question from Vladimir. If I could go back to being a year one MD, knowing that I'll apply to US residency one day, what would I focus on most in terms of STEP scores, clinical experience, research, and observerships? They're all important. What I would focus on is, since step one is pass fail, the only job you have for step one now is do not fail it. That will be looked on extremely badly. So in your first 2 years, I would focus very hard on learning as much medicine as you can, and particular learning enough to pass step one. And that's also because when you come to the United States, they kind of assume that you learned everything that was on step one. So, you know, there's that too. I'm really not sure what's most important aside from that. For most of these things, it's you need to kind of do all of them, but if you want to think career-wise, you just kind of need to cross a line on all of them. So some research would be good, you know, some clinical experience would be good, you know. So what I would really think you should have is your sort of, if you are a year one, if you're MS1 now, then in your mind, you've got to be like, all right, so I want to nail step one, you know, I want to nail step two. I want to do an elective in the United States, and I want to get on some research. And then beyond that, if you're nailing step one and step two, you should do well on your examination, so your transcript will look good. If you're nailing step one and step two, then your medical knowledge on your rotations will be adequate. And so then the rest of your job is keep your nose clean, which is show up to everything, be professional, learn stuff, be enthusiastic, and that kind of thing. So rather than so I would not put all of your eggs in any one basket. Like, it's not like if I just get a good enough step score, I can apply to anywhere. And it's not like, well, I've got plenty of research, I can apply everywhere. Programs will tend to also be a bit more holistic and be like, you know, if they met requirements on, you know, most or all of these things. So just kind of have those, have your little checklist of stuff you should do. And if you find one thing is really easy for you, like, yeah, I've got great research, then, you know, then do that and make that be something that really stands out in your application. But yeah, just kind of have that mental checklist of stuff I want to make sure is on my CV, stuff that I want to make sure I've done. And you just sort of stay balanced like that. I see another question from Vladimir. Do I think residency interviews will continue to be held online or video conference format, or will they be back to in person? So I really, really don't know the answer to this question. I can speak only from my experiences here. So this is the second year we've done like what we've just completed is the second year of purely online applications. We found that the group that we recruited through the first entirely online application was exceptional, and it was broader than had been in previous years. So there were more people from more places that we were able to talk to. And we've all noticed that when we're talking to people on Zoom, that sort of thing, often we're talking to them in their homes. And so we're just kind of it's in some ways kind of getting to know them, you know, like they might have a pet show up in the picture, or like, you know, like it was actually kind of easy to get to know them, which is a huge part of the interview process. The other thing is that every interview day it's a lot of resources if you're at a good program, you know, like a good program. So somewhere you want to match at puts in a big effort for its interview day to make sure it's a good experience for people so they want to come there. So, you know, and there's a lot of coordination and logistics and planning to make sure that, you know, rooms are available, that food arrives on time, that people show up on time, that you go and send someone to find the people who are lost, all those sorts of things. And doing it over Zoom is like an order of magnitude simpler. It's still a big day, it's still a big production, it's still, you know, but you really, it's just much more straightforward, and then everyone goes off to do their own thing, and, you know, like you're done. So I suspect a lot more programs will stick with online interviewing, but I'm really not sure. I think programs that recruit international graduates will actually kind of be happy to do a mix of both going forward, but this is really speculation, and it's also just going to depend on what COVID allows and what what kind of travel is possible. So yeah, Connie is asking, did I put my experience from my PhD in my application? Yes. So on ERAS, the application is standardized. So basically everything, all of your degrees go on there. Your high school diploma does not. But basically there's space on the sort of standardized CV for what your graduate education, so like your undergraduate degree, if you've got one, any sort of master's or PhD, they go on there as well, and of course your medical education go on there. And then other stuff you've done goes on in terms of volunteer experience, research experience, clinical experience. So there is a way to kind of count everything that you'd put on your other CV. So I absolutely put my PhD on there. And then in addition, you write your cover letter, and that's where you kind of build your own narrative. And so, you know, other experiences I had on there that were relevant went straight into the cover letter. So yeah, so that was something which I had an edge as an applicant that I had that I was absolutely able to include. So how much does past employment factor into the process for matching? I don't know. I think that ends up being very program specific. I really suspect that it's entirely program specific. You know, I know a lot of people. So I know a lot of people. Sorry, I just want to be clear. So Victoria, do you mean just like how much, if for instance you work as like an intern in Australia, or do you mean like if you worked in the past as a you know, like in some other position, or like in research or in some biomedical thing or something like that?
Yes, in the charting outcomes online, they do show and compare between international graduates, domestic graduates, how many work positions you've had in the past. And I'm just wondering because I guess there is a difference if you've never held an employment position versus if you have experience in some kind of employment context. But I'm not really sure how much that factors in, because a lot of US students just go straight into medical school after undergrad.
Right. So it's obviously it's not a requirement for you to start working there. So because as you say, like US medical students will just go straight in. So it's not unusual. So okay, so I have a lot of colleagues from India, and they're people who knew reasonably early in medical school that they were going to apply to work in the United States, and often with a plan to then move back and practice once they'd finished. And they would often, several of them did something. So like as part of their training there, you'll do, because it's all undergraduate, you'll do 6 years of medical school. And then and to complete your training, you have to do a year of internship. And a lot of them stretch that over 2 years. So they would also have more time to travel to US and do observerships at different places. And basically tried to get all their letters from US sources in that way as well. I think from my point of view, based on what people are asking me, it was really valuable that all of my letters of recommendation had come from people who'd seen me practice clinically. So, you know, they were all supervisors that I'd had as a PG 3 or 4. But our program in general hires people who've done between 0 and 2 years of work after medical school, and it's not an issue. Like, it's not an issue that they haven't worked before. It's just kind of like, yeah, okay, yeah, they've worked for a bit or they haven't, and there's more of an understanding that people will go through the process of applying to come to the United States at different stages of their education. So whether it's in their final year or like in the year or 2 or even 3 after graduation. And that's the thing that comes up too. So right now in one of our units, I put in 3 people who all went to the same university in Pakistan in the same class. but they're all, one's a PG3, one's a PG2, one's a PG1, because they all just did different parts of their subsequent planning to come to the US at different rates and applied at different times. So programs that recruit IMGs know that that can happen. And I think, yeah, I don't think it's crucial. I think, yeah, I really don't think it's crucial, especially not for programs that are used to recruiting IMGs. It can be good to have, but yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I can't give you a really concrete answer on that.
No worries. It just, the program is, the information's available, and I feel like a lot of people don't know what to make of it. So that's why I was asking, but thank you.
Yeah. And yeah, again, I think the main thing is some of that will be program specific. They might say, oh, we really want to make sure people have worked before. Others are very comfortable, like not paying any attention to it. So yeah, your mileage may vary.
Awesome. I think we were able to answer a lot of the questions there. I just have a final question for you.
Sure.
So I know you mentioned with getting some US clinical experience, and of course how that can help, especially if it's in a specialty that you're interested in. As a medical student, let's say, kind of towards the end of their year two, thinking about choosing to do an elective rotation, let's say in the US, what would be the steps to kind of arrange for that? Like what kind of people would you have to contact to kind of try to get this facilitated?
Right. So for those people in that position, again, strong recommend that you do it if you can. Obviously it's a financial commitment. There might be, sort of loans and support available, or it might not be an issue for you. Most places, so most programs will have their Office of Graduate Medical Education. So if you look on, if you like, would really like to, come to where I am and do an observership, they'll have an Office of Graduate Medical Education, and they'll have a contact person. They may have something on their website regarding, like doing observerships or doing electives and that sort of thing. And if they do, then, sort of read up on that. But otherwise, send a very polite email, or even if you can find a way to call during business hours to say, I'm interested in coming to visit, and saying why. And get that kind of done sooner rather than later, because there is a significant amount of paperwork involved from both ends. So I didn't do this, but I know people that do. But basically, because your medical school they have to put together a program of what you're meant to be doing there, so that your medical school can say, yes, this is an elective, good. And then they also have to make sure everything's good from a all of those things, immigration, medical education, liability, all that stuff point of view. So places that are used to have it will usually have a system set up, and will cost a certain amount of money. So yeah, so sooner than later, a lot of places will, especially larger programs, university hospitals, that sort of thing, will have a system by which people can come and do observerships, and may even have it where they're used to taking international graduates. But yeah, get in touch with programs early. So like if you're coming to the end of your second year, hang on, so right now we're in July, right? So you'd be looking, like, so right now people might be looking into doing something in, say, like January or so. Now is a really, really great time to get onto that. So yeah, but yeah, move faster. So get onto that quickly at both ends. As soon as they sort of say what, then press through. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. It may cost money in terms of education as well. Like they may say, like, because this is medical education, they may also charge you for it, but everyone's different. Yeah. Someone has sent me a direct message, which I think is fine to do. Yeah. So basically, do I think programs will be understanding regarding how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected travel for international students? So someone who wanted to do electives in North America but wasn't able to travel and saw the letters from Australian doctors. Programs are extremely aware. And the reason that they're extremely aware is because they're going to see they're going to see a change in the applications they received this year, you know, and the last year and the year before. And like I can say from my point of view, we were used to taking observers in prior to COVID, and we haven't had any because since COVID, because GMEs, it's just been too hard from like a policy and liability point of view. It will come back, but so every program who's used to considering applications from Australian students is going to be looking at them the same way and being like, oh, yeah, actually, we're not getting anyone with much experience in the United States because a lot of people are having issues traveling over here. So yeah, it'd be nice. And but at the moment, I think programs are aware of the obstacles you face.
Awesome. I don't see any more questions in the chat here. And if you don't have any more on your end through direct message,
I've got nothing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for, your time.
No.
I'm sure a lot of us and the people asking questions, this was very helpful for all of us. Of course, navigating the process can be tricky, as mentioned, and with the added barrier with COVID-19 and how that's presented some challenges as well. It's definitely nice to hear from your experience and start planning about this earlier rather than later. So awesome. So we're just going to wrap up the presentation. We have a few things. I have my screen shared actually, and this is for the UQ graduates from 2021. So actually 7 participated in the 2021 match from UQ, and 6 of them were successful, which is really great. And then 7 out of 11 for the Canadian match this past. And on the UQ website, there's also publicly available data on where UQ graduates have completed their postgraduate training. Nadia just put that in the chat. We are now just going to quickly close up with Victoria. If you just want to take over, should be done in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Victoria. I'm a second-year onshore international student, and I'm also your year 2 international rep through UQMS. And I'm just going to outline some of the UQ specific resources that are available. A lot of this content is going to be focused on onshore international students, since a lot of the content for UQ Ochsner is very well advertised. And a lot of students in the onshore international cohort can feel particularly lost and unsure where to look. So here I gave the guide of how I find these resources, but I'll just post a link in the chat as well. So if you go to current students and you in the UQ Medical School page and you click on overseas certification and residency, you can see there options for both the US and the Canadian match and all the information you need. And it gives you timelines, and this website will give you UQ specific resources and the timeframes you should be working in for both of the match processes. And the website is updated annually, and as new information becomes available, they also update it. So the preparation steps actually begin in year 2 of the program for the time frame that they give you. But when it comes to the residency match itself, an expression of interest is sent out to students in the final year of the program, where they ask non-Ochsner students interested in the US or Canadian residency match to register their interest, so you receive relevant communications. So a note about this, expression of interest might seem voluntary to many students, but you actually need to register for this so they can communicate, so you can communicate with the faculty while you're applying. So yeah, so you can also get an idea of the communication you'll receive. For example, for the content of what was formerly known as the Dean's Letter, it's now known under a different name. It's the Medical School Performance Evaluation for the US, or the Medical School Performance Report for the Canadian application process. So you can see, here's just a screenshot of it and what they include in this report. So you can see the grade you received, where you sort of fell into with the rest of the class. And they'll also, by the looks of it, give a few comments if you highlight an evaluation, what they said about you. They'll highlight some of the good parts. And they also explain what the overall grade is based on. So just a note for non-Ochsner applicants, the rankings presented in this letter, you don't get, a lot of programs have like a formal class ranking. You don't have that through UQ. Instead, they show where you fell on a graph, as you can see here. So for that, you're compared to both international and domestic applicants. For onshore applicants. I believe for Ochsner applicants, it's different. I think you're compared to only Ochsner, but I'm not 100% sure about this. I just know from Ochsner students who have mentioned it that they're compared with Ochsner. So that's the report you can expect there. And you don't need to fill out 2 separate applications if you're applying to both the Canada and the US. The letters are incredibly similar. So the faculty will just ask for your information and they'll tailor the letter accordingly. So when it comes to the time frame, I know for Ochsner MD students, you have to sit step 1 to perform year 3 and 4 clinical work in the US. The faculty recommends you sit step 1 at the end of phase 1 because a lot of the content on that exam is highly relevant to phase 1. But technically there isn't a definitive guideline, a definitive time frame that you have to sit it by. You just need to sit before you apply, of course. But yeah, it is advised that heavily advised that you sit it at the end of phase 1. So another thing I want to add, I'm just going to send a link to the research portal. Just looking at the questions, can you express interest for both the Canadian and American routes in year 4? Yes, you can. So if you look at the community page in Blackboard, the overall page, if you look at the year 4 discussion board, you can see a copy of what they send to students. And there you can indicate that you want to apply to both, for example. So that is the research portal for UQ. So I'm just mentioning this because research is becoming more important for international medical graduates. And you can see if you look at charting outcomes, you can see the average number of publications going up each year. So for UQ specifically, they have a student research portal, which you can use to apply to projects directly. Also, as an alternative, you can contact people directly as well. And often, personally, I find that with this approach, you can speak to potential supervisors about your interest without the context of the usually high level of competition when it comes to applying for research positions when they're formally advertised. So it's another approach you can consider. And when applying to research topics, I just want to give a few tips to apply for things that you are interested in and passionate about. And I know a lot of people say this, but the main reason to do this isn't talked about as often. So when you're completing a project and you're actually intrinsically driven to complete it, it'll feel less like work to you and you'll be more dedicated and have more time searching the literature and getting a good foundation for the topic. And research supervisors can very much tell when students are trying to publish to tick criteria off a list, and they know how heavily publications are emphasized, for example, in the US residency application process. And you want to give supervisors a good impression, and they can tell when they speak to you, for example, how extensive your reflection on the topic is. So another tip to keep in mind is that when it comes to looking for research positions, and which includes a UQ, to do this early, because even though there can be some pressure to publish before you apply, supervisors often won't put risk in publishing inaccurate or rushed data just because we have to, by a certain time, apply. So just keep that in mind, that there really is, there's a long time frame to actually publishing content, and sometimes papers get rejected and you need to resubmit. So just keep that in mind and look for positions early, of course. And that's about it on my end.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria. that really concludes today's presentation. We hope you found that helpful. And of course, we're able to lean off the insights of Dr. Smith and what he was able to share today. So we did mention that all participants were entered to be randomly selected for a 6-month AMBOSS subscription. So our winner was Louise, and I direct messaged you. I'm not sure if you're still here with us. I'll just need your email address, and we can send you that code to follow. But if no one else has any other questions or concerns, thank you again for joining us this morning or this evening. And thank you again, Dr. Smith, for your time this evening as well. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day or evening. Bye, guys.